Closed doors, I'm a fool for your love.
What's up? This is Zada Wrestling, back with another wrestling video, and today is going to be about Carlito. Now, Carlito, he just came back to WWE, and this is February 2020. He recently came back in the Royal Rumble, and when he did come back, a lot of people, they was excited to see him. But today we're going to go look into his first run in WWE from 2004 until 2010. Carlito debuted in 2004 on SmackDown when he defeated John Cena on the SmackDown After No Mercy in 2004. He beat John Cena in his debut match to win the United States Championship, which doesn't happen too often. Carlito was one of the only people to win a championship in his debut match. Carlito then went on to have a storyline with John Cena where he allegedly put a hit out on Cena and got him stabbed in a nightclub. But John Cena would eventually come back, and he defeated Carlito to regain the United States Championship 42 days after Carlito won it. So Carlito's U.S. title reign lasted about 42 days. But during this title reign, he actually got injured and he broke his arm. So after he lost the title to John Cena, it was like a 25-second match. Once he lost it, it was not really too eventful for him. Carlito was hurt for the next couple of months, and he was in a feud with Teddy Long, where Teddy would have him outside the arena doing many different tasks for him. You know, he's basically like, you know, since Carlito couldn't wrestle, he was making him do other stuff. But Carlito would eventually get back into ring shape and get cleared. He would be accompanied by Matt Morgan, who returned to WWE in 2005 after about probably a year out. He came back and he had a stuttering character. I don't know why they thought that would work, but his character was that he stuttered a lot. But anyway, he was Carlito's bodyguard, and he assisted Carlito in his feud against The Big Show, which culminated in a match at Judgment Day 2005. Judgment Day 2005, it was a SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view, but a lot of people look at that as being one of the best, brand exclusive pay-per-views there were. And Carlito and Big Show, they were, one of the matches. Carlito actually got the upset victory over the Big Show after Matt Morgan came in and attacked Big Show behind the ref's back. And that about wraps it up for Carlito's run on SmackDown in 2004. I believe his last match was a tag match on SmackDown involving it might have been Kurt Angle, but it was definitely Big Show, and John Cena was the opposite, on the opposite side. I think it might have been he teamed up with JBL. But nonetheless, in June 2005, Carlito was drafted to Monday Night Raw, and on his first night there, just like on SmackDown, his debut on Raw, he beats Shelton Benjamin to win the Intercontinental Championship. This run was slightly better than his U.S. title run. Carlito would win the title, and then he would defeat Shelton Benjamin in a rematch at Vengeance 2005. He wasn't really involved in too many feuds going into SummerSlam. I remember him having tag team matches against John Cena, but he wasn't directly involved in a feud with John Cena. He was teaming up with Carlito. Carlito was teaming up with Kurt Angle at the time. And but after SummerSlam, he would be engaged in a feud with Ric Flair. Ric Flair saying that the only championship he's never won is the Intercontinental title. And he challenged him for the title at Unforgiven 2005. Carlito would drop the Intercontinental title to Ric Flair at this show in 2005. He would fail to regain the championship from Ric Flair as well. After this, Carlito would start a team with Chris Masters, the Masters of Cool. That's where this team started, right after Carlito's IC title run. They began to team up during the build-up to Survivor Series 2005, Brand vs. Brand, Raw vs. SmackDown. And Carlito and Chris Masters were unable to win in that match as Team Raw lost to Team SmackDown. But it wasn't the end of the world for Carlito and Chris Masters, because they would eventually qualify for the WWE Championship Elimination Chamber match. In that match, it was going to take place at New Year's Revolution in early January. The participants were the WWE Champion John Cena, Kane, Carlito, Shawn Michaels, Chris Masters, and Kurt Angle. Those were your 6. Or if I already said Kurt Angle, then I meant Shawn Michaels. But those were your 6 in there. And the final 3 actually were the team of Carlito, Chris Masters, and then the WWE Champion John Cena. They were the final 3. Carlito would turn on Chris Masters during the match and roll him up, but he would get rolled up shortly after by John Cena. John Cena retains the title. This actually wasn't the end of the partnership, though. It would reach even more tension at the Royal Rumble in 06 when Carlito eliminated Masters from the Royal Rumble. I believe that's what happened, yeah. And after this, it still wasn't over for them. They still were a team. They got into a feud with Big Show and Kane over the Raw Tag Team titles. And at WrestleMania 22, they challenged Big Show and Kane for the tag titles. And unfortunately, they were unable to win. Supposedly, they were actually supposed to win that match. But Big Show and Kane ended up keeping the championships because they were going to bring in the Spirit Squad after WrestleMania. And they wanted them to be the heel champions. So, what happened to the Masters of Cool was, shortly after this loss at WrestleMania, Carlito turned on Chris Masters and he became a babyface on Raw. Chris Masters was the heel. And he was feuding with Chris Masters, and in Backlash 2006, they had a match where Carlito was able to pick up the win once again. And Carlito would then move on to other things in 2006. So, as a face, Carlito could do a lot of different things at this point because he's not that same guy that he, once was. There's different opponents he could face. And he starts off challenging, or he gets in a feud for the Intercontinental Championship. The champion is Shelton Benjamin. And eventually Johnny Nitro gets involved in this feud, and he comes over and he wins the Intercontinental Championship. My opinion, I think Carlito was supposed to win the championship until they realized, all right, we're going to put Johnny Nitro on Raw, because he got moved from SmackDown. So I was thinking Carlito, he probably would have won that title. But Johnny Nitro got the championship. And also Jeff Hardy was coming back, so the babyface ranking, Carlito was going down. That's what I'm saying. But he was still a main focal point of Raw. And shortly after SummerSlam, he got into a feud with Randy Orton. And it was a pretty entertaining feud for what it was. Pretty forgettable feud. But they had a match at Unforgiven 2006, and the ending saw Carlito go for a springboard move. I believe it was a springboard turnaround DDT, and he got caught by Randy Orton with an RKO. It was one of the first times Randy Orton did the RKO out of nowhere, and it looked pretty good, and Orton got the win. After this, Carlito, he would be kind of languishing. He wasn't really doing much. At Cyber Sunday, he was voted in by the fans to be Jeff Hardy's opponent for the Intercontinental title, but he was unable to win the title. Nothing wrong with that. Hardy had just came back. He was really hot, but going into 2007, Carlito wasn't doing much of anything, and that's what started his partnership with Ric Flair. I believe it was early 2007. Ric Flair saw Carlito leaving the show with, I believe it was Torrie Wilson, before the show was over, and he was telling Carlito he needs to stay, he needs to focus more because he could be a champion, blah blah blah. And apparently it was on the show, but he was actually telling him that in a more real life sense, because I guess Carlito wasn't he wasn't putting his best effort forward, I guess. But they started a slight partnership in 2007, and they were originally supposed to be in the Raw Tag Team title match at WrestleMania 23, but it was bumped to the pre-show, and they were on the pre-show instead. Carlito wasn't too happy about this. He even went on record on an interview and saying it was ridiculous that he and Ric Flair aren't on WrestleMania's main card. After this, Carlito would actually turn heel on Ric Flair, so we're back to Carlito being a heel, which I think he was best at when he was a heel. So Carlito was a heel, and he was feuding with Ric Flair. They actually had a match at Judgment Day 2007, to culminate in their feud. And this is where Carlito, he started to come into his own once again. This is 2007. Honestly, was probably Carlito's best year, just due to the fact that he was in more main event stories than he was before. So going into late 2007, mid 2007, I should say, Triple H returned from his injury, and he defeated King Booker at SummerSlam in his return match. But shortly after that, he started feuding with Carlito. And this was big for Carlito because at the time, like I said, especially 06, he wasn't really doing that much. But this feud with Triple H, Triple H beat him, and he kind of beat him, I'd say, easily, kind of. It was still putting Carlito in a spot that he hadn't been in before. And I should mention, during the summer of 2007, this was after his Ric Flair feud, but before the Triple H feud. He actually was in a feud, I forgot about this. He was in a feud with the Sandman, one of my favorite ECW wrestlers. He defeated him at the Great American Bash in a Singapore Cane on a pole match. They had actually a lot of good matches together, to be honest. But then he was in the Triple H feud, as I said, and he would lose to Triple H at Unforgiven in a no disqualifications match, but it only applied to Carlito. Which only made Carlito look worse because, he had no disqualifications, but yet Triple H didn't, but he still lost. But later on in 2007, he actually asked for his release from WWE, but he was talked out of it by Vince McMahon. And towards the latter part of 2007, he was just on Raw every week teaming with Santino. Going into 2008, he had a tag team with Santino Marella when he was a heel. Not doing much at all. But he did, in December of 2007, he did have a match against Jeff Hardy, a ladder match for the Intercontinental Championship. But unfortunately, he was unable to win the title from Jeff Hardy. He would then go on to defeat Cody Rhodes and qualify for the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 24. A lot of people at the time, they had a lot of people in mind of who they thought was going to win. Most people figured Jeff Hardy would win, but after he was suspended and he wasn't going to be in the match, the pool was open. But nobody really thought Carlito was going to win because at this point, he had been through his Triple H feud, he'd been through the Sandman feud, and the Ric Flair feud. But it was almost like they didn't really want to do anything with him. But following WrestleMania, him and Santino, they teamed up a few times, even going after the Raw Tag Team Championships from Cody Rhodes and Hardcore Holly, but they were unable to win the titles in the end. And 2008 was a quiet year for Carlito, especially the first half. That first half, he didn't do anything, but in June 2008, he was drafted to SmackDown, and he eventually teamed up with his debuting brother Primo. He was a face. He wasn't really on SmackDown until September because that's when Primo came along. But in September, he came back as a face. Primo made his debut, and they beat Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder in their debut. Now, Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder were the tag team champions at the time. They beat them in their debut in a non-title match. But 2 weeks later, there was a title match between them, and the Colognes ended up winning the tag team championships. But the only problem is, those guys had those championships for about 280 days, and they did about 0 things with those titles during that time. I believe they won them in September or October of 2008. I cannot tell you one thing that they did during that time. That is probably the most forgettable tag reign of all time. And the fact that it lasted for 280 days is crazy. The tag team division was really being overlooked at the time badly. Even on Raw, I mentioned Hardcore Holly and Cody Rhodes. They were a very forgettable tag team champion duo as well. But on Raw at the time, you had teams like Legacy, which everybody knows Legacy, but nobody remembers them as tag team champions. You had CM Punk and Kofi Kingston. Nobody remembers that. But the tag team division was being overshadowed by one team, and that was The Miz and John Morrison. And they were on ECW, and they were feuding with Raw's team, Crime Time. That was the feud that the WWE cared about at the time. So the Colognes didn't do anything for the rest of 2008 as far as I'm concerned. Going into 2009, they didn't do much either. I think Carlito might have been in the 09 Royal Rumble. But at WrestleMania, they competed on the pre-show. And it was the SmackDown Tag Champions, the Colognes, versus the Raw Tag Team Champions, who were actually a part of ECW. Doesn't matter. But it was The Miz and John Morrison. And in this match, the winner would get the Unified Tag Team Championship. They were basically they realized that the tag team divisions were pretty bad, so they combined them into one. And there you go. The Colognes ended up winning the Unified Tag Team Championships at WrestleMania 25 on the pre-show. Underwhelming, but I've seen the match and it's actually a really good match. Following this, they barely won on pay-per-view. I don't think they ever won on pay-per-view until the pay-per-view that they lost it. It was supposed to be them versus Legacy, Ted DiBiase and Cody Rhodes. That was the match. But what happened, Edge and Chris Jericho complained. Edge complained about not being on the show. This was at the Great American Bash 09. Edge complained about being on the show, and Chris Jericho complained about losing the Intercontinental Championship earlier in the night. So Edge and Chris Jericho were put in the match, and they won the match and the titles. So that's pretty much the end of the Colognes as tag team champions, because Carlito and Primo would never win those titles again. So at this point, we're in middle of 2009. Shortly after the tag team title loss, Carlito would turn on Primo, turning heel once again. And this is around the time where I really started watching wrestling when I was a kid. And I was a really big fan of Carlito just based off what he was doing in 09, which was nothing compared to what he was doing years previous. But Carlito in 2009, he turned on Primo. And it was a singles feud, but it wasn't important enough to be on pay-per-view. So what happened was Carlito and Primo kind of got slotted into the U.S. title scene. And they were involved in a six-pack challenge. During this time on Raw, there was a lot of six-pack challenges, a lot of triple threats and fatal four-ways for the U.S. title. And more times than not, Carlito or Primo would be in that match. They were in the U.S. title scene at the time. But in the late summer of 2009, Carlito, he took a break from WWE. I don't know if he was hurt or what was wrong with him, but he took a break and he wouldn't return until November 2009, where he came out and he interrupted John Cena. And this was during Cena's feud with Sheamus, when Sheamus first came on the scene. Carlito was just telling John Cena that he needs to be careful because Sheamus is new and he's more hungry than Cena. He went to spit the apple in Cena's face. Cena picked him up and hit him with a FU. Now, this was Carlito's last 3 months in the company. It was pretty sad, honestly. He came back in November, and I mean, he lasted until February 2010. I don't remember anything he did in December, January, February. Only thing I remember as a kid watching, I remember Ted DiBiase, and he was trying to be like his dad, the $1 Million Man, and he was paying people to attack R-Truth, which was the person that he was feuding with at the time. And I remember Carlito and Primo came out, and they just beat up R-Truth, and then collected money from Ted DiBiase after they did it. And that was the last time we ever saw Carlito on WWE programming. It was a paid attack on R-Truth by Ted DiBiase. I'm assuming that they were gonna put Carlito and Primo with Ted DiBiase, but Carlito would ask for his release in February of 2010, and that would be the end of Carlito's run in WWE, as WWE would grant him that release. He wanted out. Honestly, I had mentioned it earlier. He had wanted out for years, but they had always talked him in the stand. But he had developed the pain pill addiction, so it was kind of like a mutual thing. Like, they both agreed, like, yeah, this isn't the best fit for anybody right now. So Carlito went on his way. Now, as far as what I believe Carlito should have did in his career, I mean, he's a one-time U.S. champion, he's a one-time Intercontinental champion, and he's a one-time SmackDown Tag Team champion. In my opinion, he did he did a lot in the short amount of time he was there. I think he should have at least won a mid-card championship one more time. He should have been like a 2-time IC or a 2-time US champion. And another thing, in like an alternate universe, man, if it ever would have happened, and I've never heard anybody mention this, but let's just be honest, when ECW was around in WWE, by 2007 it wasn't ECW anymore, and people knew that. You know, Bobby Lashley was the champion, you know, it just wasn't ECW. The same man was drafted to Raw. I mean, I don't see why Carlito couldn't win the ECW and maybe won the World Heavyweight title there. You know, Mark Henry did it. Matt Hardy did it. Yeah, he wasn't as experienced. He wasn't a veteran at that time. But you also seen guys like Bobby Lashley, as I mentioned. You got guys like CM Punk, John Morrison, Chavo Guerrero. I mean, if they can go over there and succeed as world champion, I don't see why Carlito couldn't have. But it didn't happen. But he's back now, and I hope Carlito is maybe able to do a little something in the future. Maybe another tag team title run. But that was Carlito's career in WWE. I think he had a decent career. He had a really good character, and nobody's ever going to forget him. That's one thing that he did make. Like, he stamped his legacy in WWE. Nobody's going to forget the apple. You know, nobody's going to forget him spitting apple in somebody's face. Carlito had a good WWE career. Should he have been a main eventer? Well, when he came in, that's probably what you thought, but it was a mix of Carlito being real young, from what I hear, and immature, and eventually pain pill addiction happened, and he just never reached his full potential because, pretty much because he was just too young at the time. But he probably should have been a main eventer, but I think he had a decent career without being a main eventer as well.